watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have former Utah GOP Chair Thomas Wright and former Democratic State Senator Scott Howell. Gentlemen, great to have both of you back on the show.
Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here.
Let's get right into a Wall Street Journal op-ed we saw from our own Utah Senator Mitt Romney during the week, essentially calling on the GOP field for president and saying, look, if it comes to a certain point and you're not making traction, you got to get out of this race. And the goal there is to, in Romney's eyes, is to make sure that former President Donald Trump does not get the nomination again. So, Thomas, first off, let's dig into plurality and the role it plays in this race. Common consensus seems to be that plurality does benefit the former president.
In this case, it absolutely does, and this is the great part about having a primary, is we get to see all the candidates come forward, make their case to the voters, and Mitt Romney has every right to come out. Senator Romney has every right to come out and say what he thinks and to lobby people to support the way that he wants to see it. But the beauty of this is we get to hear all the candidates and we get to see which one rises to the top. You know, Glenn, I'm not a fan of plurality. I think in the state of Utah and in presidential politics, it's one of the biggest challenges we have. It doesn't create good results, and we need to have runoff elections to make sure that winners win with a majority of the vote.
Yeah, we see in those instances that the winning candidate walks away with somewhere in the 30s percent of the vote. Scott, let's bring you in on this because this is something we saw from a strategy standpoint back in 2020 with the Democrats. Bernie Sanders was really gaining some ground, and we saw Pete Buttigieg and Senator Klobuchar saying, look, we need to back out of this race. We don't have what now President Biden has, so let's get out of this race and support him so that Bernie does not become the nominee. How did that all play out, and could that potentially work in this case as well?
Well, for me, it played out great. That's exactly what I like it. And Thomas and I might disagree on that, but you know, when I look at what could have been the possibility to have a Bernie in there or someone else of that ilk, I think that President Biden was the right choice, and it really worked for us. And while he only had a percentage of that, in that case, it was something that really made sense. I thought Senator Romney's op-ed was brilliant. It was really good. He pointed out in so many ways what candidates do. There's a lot of candidates that get into this to hang on. And then after they get done, you can think of Rick Santorum, Rubio, and those people who are running for president. They got big speaking engagements after that. They got big deals. So you always have your staff that keeps saying, hey, guess what, Thomas? Hang in this race. Even though you're 22 points behind, you should hang in on the race. And those are probably the do-getters who are in it for the wrong reason.
Talk about that, Thomas. There's also some ego that comes into play when you're dealing with a situation like this. Do you see a situation where a majority of those candidates in the Republican field will be willing to get out and potentially back the one who has the best chance against the former president?
Well, Senator Romney did make a compelling case. I don't know if it will have an impact on those candidates. Look, it's hard when you have supporters and people that back your campaign that are out working hard. You want to see it through. You want to see it through to the end. I've been in a race where, I was unfortunately not the winner, and I wanted to show my kids that you stay in it till the end. You accept the result. You work hard until the end, and so there's a lot of different ways to look at this. Strategically, obviously, if you want to see one person win, in this case, the case that Senator Romney is making is one to defeat former President Trump. But I do think plurality creates a lot of problems, and there ought to be a system where people can run, give it their best, but ultimately there needs to be a runoff where somebody obtains a simple majority. And we need to work toward that in presidential politics, and we absolutely need to fix that in the state of Utah.
Yeah.
Scott, talk about this dynamic that we've seen play out over years now between our Senator Mitt Romney and former President Donald Trump. They've been at odds quite a bit over the years.
Well,
how does this kind of play into that effect as well?
Well, they're not inviting each other to their birthday parties. Let me just say that. It's really interesting to see. And I thought Mitt in the op-ed was very clear on how he approached about the morality of President Trump. And the things that he talked about and how could he get elected. President Trump has been indicted 2 times. It sounds like there's going to be a 3rd one that's going to come out pretty soon. And I think when you look at that and some of the action of the former president has taken. I think Mitt Romney's on the side of morality. He's on the side of bringing out truth, and he wants candidates who have a moral code of conduct that we can all appreciate and support. So I applaud Senator Romney. And I think he did something that was very courageous. It was interesting. The most liberal Democrat in the state of Utah right now in the state Senate, Nate Bullen, tweeted out that Senator Romney had more courage than any Republican he's ever seen.
Okay, but let's dig into that, Thomas, because on the flip side of that, it has created some situations for the senator in the Republican Party. You know, some people that support the president that don't like what he's doing. So how does that potentially impact him with Utah Republicans, where he really needs to be strong?
Yeah, I love when Scott Howell, the Democrat, points out the most liberal Democrat agrees with the strategy in the Republican primary. That's good Sunday morning comedy. But no, really what this is about is everybody gets to speak up and speak their mind. That's what Senator Romney has done. He's earned the right to speak up and say what he thinks. And so have other people, people that support other candidates. And at the end of the day, that's what's most important here is we need to vet all the candidates, all the ideas. We need to have a vigorous debate. And then we're going to elect the person that we want to be the president of the United States. And most importantly, I see a lot of Republicans motivated, energized, and enthusiastic about defeating President Biden. This presidency of Joe Biden has been a complete disaster. And everybody knows that we can't continue on this road. They're questioning whether or not he can even continue himself. And we need to make a change in the executive branch. And that's what I like seeing. The Republican Party's energized, and everybody's coming out with their opinions, and that's the way it should be.
Okay, Scott, I'm going to give you real quick a second to respond to what Thomas just said about the Biden administration.
Well, of course, Thomas, my good friend, needs to take a shot there at the president. I think Joe Biden's done an admirable job. Has it been perfect? No. Has he made some mistakes? Absolutely. But for me, it's better than the alternative. That's all I can say. And when you look at it from that perspective, as someone who has a moral compass that is doing the right things, or trying to do the right things, I think that that's what we have to look at. Okay. And it's probably a challenge for any good Democrat or good Republican not to be able to speak, as Thomas says, speak about the good things that they've done versus the challenges they've had.
Okay. This is a pretty good segue into this last segment I want to get into. We've used up most of our time, but real quick, earlier this month, Governor Cox launching a Disagree Better initiative to start his term as chair of the National Governors Association. How can we disagree better? Let's talk about that real quick. Thomas, your thoughts on that?
Style in politics matters. We should disagree civilly. That's great. But we have so many big policy challenges in this country. I would rather see our elected officials focus on the heavy lifting that needs to be done on the policy side. We have grave challenges, and the Biden presidency has been a failure. Our border security is not there. The fentanyl crisis is killing family members all across this country. Our national debt is out of control. Inflation's barely getting under control. It's just the problems in our country are severe. And while I applaud focusing on style, to me, I'm going to look for people to vote for and to support that are serious about policy changes that are going to make an impact so that my kids can afford to buy housing. And I mean, the tax rate stays affordable. There's so many things that are going on. You can't just talk about style anymore. It has to have a little bit more substance than that.
Scott, your thoughts? Disagreeing better?
It disagreed, and it does matter, and I think you're seeing a good example of it. Thomas and I could sit down and have a rational conversation about the most important things in this country.
Which, by the way, has always been the goal of my show, I will point out.
Well, you've done a great job, Glenn, and you continue to do a good job, and Scott and I have gotten along very well.
I couldn't agree more. The national debt. Why can't we come together to that? Border control. And I'm going to blame both parties. I'm going to give equal shots at both parties. It is so stupid what they do. Instead of sitting down and having a comprehensive program that can benefit everyone, they sit there and fight. They put razor wire in water. They send people in a bus. That's just not good politics. Agree to disagree and do it civilly, but come together with an outcome. You have to have that objective of the outcome. When I was in the state Senate, we worked, Lane Beatty and I worked all the time when he was the president. we very seldom had something that was disagreeable that we would go out and make emotional, or we'd make it so it was a public scene. That's not the way you do politics.
Yeah, I mean, how about just a Congress that could adopt a budget? They haven't adopted a budget since Bill Clinton was president. So, of course, both parties are to blame. I agree with you on that. But at the end of the day, yeah, we can talk about style and we can talk about disagreeing better, and that's important, and I believe in that, and I think most Americans do too. But I think at the end of the day, we have to find elected officials that have the courage to have the hard conversations and to make the hard choices, even if it costs them re-election, because we're kicking the can on too many issues. They're getting to be too intractable. They're impacting our lives too much, and style alone will not solve them.
We're out of time. We're going to have to end the conversation on that note. Gentlemen, always glad to have you with us. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Glenn.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.